Why, God, why? Episode 7 of The Rings of Power is here, and feelings are very mixed. General consensus of this episode is that it's a mess, and I firmly agree with that statement. Let's get into it. Basic summary of this episode. This finally moves some things forward, and it's bringing some story aspects together, be it clumsily. The eye is obviously a reference to the Eye of Sauron, and there are not so many subtle references to eyes throughout this entire episode, including a character that goes blind, that has no signs of injury or anything, even though she was blinded by a fire. That's a weird move. Galadriel and Halbrand reunite and head to the northwest. Okay. But again, her clear state of shock acting is not really acting. She surveys everything, but she is still cold, unlikable, with no real personality. And Halbrand does nothing else in this. The Númenóreans are portrayed as cowards. They head home, and they don't really do anything. This giant, big, epic navy that seems to come out of nowhere on all of those small ships, they're just portrayed as cowardly. They run. The Southlands are a complete mess at this point. They've been completely brutalized. Oh yes, and the Balrog awakes, and very obviously emulating the Peter Jackson films in terms of its look. And the Half-Foots basically do nothing, and not Gandalf and the whole thing. This is the thing about this series. It's lots of scenes that are just happen. There's no build-up and no connection. The orcs are set up in Mordor for the first time, but again, what the hell? Also, who designed some of this armour? When we just talk about the more C.S. Lewis-esque style of this entire piece, this is meant to bring season 1 to an end. We have one more episode. It's set up a basic premise that there's going to be either an all-out war or some epic cliffhanger, and I have a feeling they're going to end on a cliffhanger. There is no consequence, there's no build-up, there's no structure to this episode. It's just lots of scenes that don't really interconnect, and obviously a lot of scenes were filmed out of sync, just going by the costumes and the sets. Continuity does not exist in this universe for some reason, and it shows. Galadriel as an actress, the actress they've got playing her is just unlikable, and I feel like portraying her as this warrior Mary Sue type personality does not work at all, and I've said that before. What I don't understand about this episode, and this is something that's kind of bugging me now, is that this show suffers from pacing and story structure issues, and this episode is a prime example of it. It sets up things, it sets up moments, but there is no payoff. There is no build-up to these moments either. It's just stuff happens. The editing is extremely poor. Also, the lack of, considering, again, the money and people involved in this show, at least remembering your own continuity would be a good idea. This series fundamentally changes the history of Middle-earth, and it really shows. Now we need to get to the other stuff in this video. So, between the showrunners calling fans evil, they obviously don't like Tolkien, and it shows, and they're now blaming the Tolkien estate for their own failure. We have so many issues now that the breakdown of this episode is almost difficult to handle, and the biggest thing that's really happened here is Galadriel's husband is dead. So at this point, Galadriel is meant to be ancient. Why is she being portrayed more like her early First Age and pre-First Age self when this show isn't dealing with that very well? With her husband dead, her agency is kind of gone, and they're probably going to bring him back with some MacGuffin at some point, but ultimately that's also a problem. Also, the will they won't they thing with not Sauron is kind of odd, and also the kind of weird chemistry between her and Elrond, her future son-in-law, is also uncomfortable. I don't get what they're trying to do. Also, where is her daughter? That's one question I still have. I've watched this episode through. I've gone back to parts. Where is her daughter? Because she's quite important in this whole big thing. Also, they've swapped around a lot of Galadriel's story with Elrond's in this version of her, which also really does come to show in this. I also don't understand the motivations of these characters because they don't seem to exist. Other than her wanting to prove everyone wrong and just some very unlikable characterization, the writing is atrocious. This whole series feels like a disjointed fan film made with someone's handycam or their phone. And I'm going to beat this dead horse again, but the special effects are extremely hit and miss. There is some gorgeous scenery in this, but for every gorgeous piece of scenery, there is some very atrocious stuff happening, and it's very obvious in some scenes. In some of the battle scenes in previous episodes, weapons magically appear in people's hands and then disappear in the next scene, or just appear mid-shot. This show is boring, paceless, doesn't know what it's meant to be doing, and I feel like it's slowly burning its bridges. Now with season 2 confirmed, but somewhat delayed, so we probably won't see season 2 until 2024 at this point, or the very latest, the end of 23. I don't know how they're going to do this. This series fundamentally messes the history of Middle-earth up to a point of the Lord of the Rings can't happen at this point, which is another big screaming problem. Even if this show was not a Tolkien show and it was just a generic fantasy TV show, I would be saying exactly the same thing. This show is badly written, and this episode, why I think is better than the others, is still badly written, and the lines and dialogue are so clumsy in places. It's trying way too hard to be something far deeper than it is, and loses sight of what it's meant to be, and knowing that the creators of this show just hate you and call you evil because, oh my god, how dare you criticize our writing? How dare you criticize our story structure and editing? You know, they play certain cards and it's straight out the Disney playbook. I don't know how they're going to write themselves out of this unless some magical MacGuffins bring some people back to life, set the story, or Galadriel wakes up and it was all a dream. Seriously, at this point, I wonder how they're going to do this, because it's like watching a car crash in slow motion.